Okay, we are officially live. Oh my, this lighting, honey. I look like a ghost. But that's okay. Let's play some music that I do not own, do not have the rights to any of this music. Okay? I didn't think it was going to be that loud. Nisa says, hi, Lyric. Hello. What is going on, party people? This is my amazing speaker. It has like lights, flashy lights that go with the music. It's pretty cool. I don't know what type of speaker it is or where I got it from, but that's not really important because we're not encouraging people to go buy speakers. But music is always great. I can't go a day without like listening to music or singing or doing some sort of musical thing. I got a hi from Anna. Hello, people. It's 1:58. So Misa says, I'm sitting outside in the sun listening to you. I feel so peaceful. P.S. I love the speaker. Oh my goodness, it is such a nice day out. Maybe one of these days we can do a YouTube live from outside because it's starting to get nice out. But I don't know. I don't know if I get good service outside. It's good you have good service though, but you're also not like streaming. Well, technically you are. Got my water, my compostable straw. Don't worry, people. Compostable. Staying hydrated, ready to get back into our Alexa and Katie groove. We've been off of it for a bit, but we're going to get back into it today. I'm very excited. I think that we can start talking about it in a couple minutes or so, see if any more people kind of trickle in. But in the meantime, Nisa's already told us that she's sitting outside in the sun. What is one good or like relaxing or calming thing that you have done today? You can drop it in the chat box. I will put in mine. Actually, I did sit outside on my patio today. Not to copy Nisa, but I'm going to put that in mine. Sitting outside on the patio. The day. It really is a beautiful day. If you're able to go on a walk, I highly, highly recommend it. Besides the sun, I'm actually going to water my plants soon. Don't even bring up plants. My poor plants. They're not doing too hot. I think I made a TikTok about a seed that I found inside of a tomato and I planted it and it's actually like coming up and doing okay. But my other tomato plants that I've had for a while are starting to kind of wither. So I got to do some research to save my plants, people. I'm trying to have a full garden by summertime, July. I'm trying to have a full garden by July. But yes, it was really nice outside. And I'm like wearing leggings. So after a while, my legs start to get like really hot because the dark clothing will absorb like the sun's light and be warmer. So I have to go inside. But it was pretty nice out. But yes. Nisa says, awesome. My hydrangeas are just starting to come back. I don't call me greedy, but most of the things that I have planted are like vegetables and things that I can eat. I do like flowers. And technically you can eat flowers, like on like cakes and stuff. Sometimes they'll put in edible flowers, but I've mostly am trying to grow two varieties of tomatoes, spinach, squash, like the yellow kind, and then like zucchini, the green kind. I am trying to grow some lavender that has not gone very well. And then I see everybody with their beautiful gardens and flourishing plants, and I'm just like, you know, and I used to think I have a little bit of a green thumb because I can like nurture, raise the plants up until a certain point, and then they just wither away. But that's more research on my part. But yeah, that's good to hear. Nisa says, I am not good with vegetable plants. That's why I mainly stick to flowers. Maybe we need to have some like cross gardening something, you know? I mean, to be honest, I don't even think I'm good with vegetable plants either. I have yet to reap what I've sown. I've yet to harvest a fully grown vegetable. They're all just little like sprouts right now. But yes, I think the problem is I'm still having them indoors. I think with the nice weather and everything, it's time to finally move my indoor plants outside and let them flourish in the garden bed that I built. So that's probably maybe that might have something to do with it. But yes. Anybody else got some cool relaxing things? Self-care things? Sometimes it's nice to just go outside and just be present in nature and stuff, you know? I don't know if it's just me or my neighborhood or my house, but the birds, oh my goodness, the birds in my neighborhood have just been cheep, cheep, chirping, singing all day. But yes. And I'm just like, maybe it's because not as many people are like outside and everything. They're like, hey, I'm here. We're like, we know. But I've had so many birds. I've actually seen a couple cardinals and blue jays in my backyard, which are pretty exciting. They're so pretty. The colors are just so bright. I love those birds. And then there's also a woodpecker that keeps pecking at my shed. I'm pretty sure my shed is going to fall apart soon. Nisa says, same. I've been hearing an owl lately at night. That's pretty cool. Owls are super cool. Yes. Alrighty. Let's see what we've got going on here. A couple people are tuning in. We've officially been live for 6 minutes. It's about 2:05, so I'm gonna turn the music down a little bit and let's get into it, right? So formally, I just want to say hello to everybody. Thank you for tuning in to this week's live. Last week, or this week's Media Club live, because Anissa goes live too. My apologies. But last week for Media Club, we discussed the Dreams episode of Brainchild on Netflix, and for anybody who remembers, I may or may not have promised that I would start a dream journal and keep track of my dreams for the next week. I am disappointed to announce that I have no memory of any dreams that I've had this past week, so I have nothing to report back to you guys. I apologize. But if anybody else has tried it or plans on trying it or wants to try it or just hasn't had any success with it, feel free to talk about that. But I just wanted to disclose that before we get into Alexa and Katie. The dream journal from last week is sadly not filled with many dreams. But yes. But anyway, so it's been a while since we've talked about Alexa and Katie, and basically how I want Media Club to kind of flow is because Alexa and Katie is it's not a long series, but because it's something that's very like continuous, I wanted to kind of alternate between an episode of Alexa and Katie and then like an episode of something else or a movie of some sort, something that doesn't really have a plot to follow. So on one week, we're going to be talking about Alexa and Katie, which has a continuous, steady plot or story. And then the other weeks, we're going to be talking about other movies or maybe some more nonfiction based things like documentaries and stuff like that. So next week, we won't be talking about Alexa and Katie. Next week, should I even say? I'll just say it. Next week, we're going to be talking about Incredibles 2, which I'm really excited to talk about. Believe it or not, there's like quite a bit to unpack in that movie. It's on Netflix, and I believe it's also on Disney Plus. But we're talking about next week. Let's get into this week, right? So we're talking about episode 3 of Alexa and Katie. So just a little recap, just in case it's your first time watching or you haven't watched it in a while. Alexa and Katie, it's a show about two best friends. One is Alexa and one is Katie. Alexa is currently diagnosed with cancer and she is trying to navigate having cancer while also trying to be a quote unquote normal teenage girl who's starting high school. So there's a lot of things to talk about: school, clubs, friendship, relationships, all of these things that already make high school difficult enough on top of fighting cancer. And then Katie is her super supportive, quirky best friend, and they get into a lot of mischief together, but they're always there for each other. And it's a show about friendship and what it means to be a loyal friend and to have a loyal friend. So that's pretty much a little like synopsis of what the show is about. But this week's episode is episode 3. So we know that part of why Alexa can't really part of something that comes with her cancer is that she gets tired very easily. So before she was diagnosed with cancer, something that Alexa loved to do and was very good at was basketball. She was on the basketball team. But since she's been diagnosed with cancer, this year she is not able to try out for the basketball team for her freshman year of high school. So that's something that bums her out, right? And I feel like if that was something, whether it's art club for you or something, if you couldn't do it your first year, that'll bum you out. And they're back in the school talking about how she can't try out for basketball. And we see some rumors spreading, and people are saying, "Oh, we've heard that there's a girl with cancer in our grade. Who is she? I think it's so and so because she's pale, and I think it's so and so because she was absent that day." And we start to see these rumors about trying to figure out who this mystery person with cancer is in Alexa and Katie's grade. And as we know, Alexa has chosen to keep that private, sharing that mainly with only Katie, her 2 other best friends, and her family, and of course, like Katie's family. So that's her personal choice and decision. But we have these rumors spreading, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what rumors are, why they exist, how they spread, etc., etc. So let's get into it. Rumors are basically gossip or when people just say things about other people. And the reason why rumors are, negative in nature is because it's not you're talking about someone behind their back or you're talking about something that you don't have permission to talk about to other people. So that's why, rumors are bad. Nobody likes having rumors being spread about them. And for Alexa, this is especially true because this is something that she was very, very adamant on keeping private, you know? So then we find out that it was one of her friends who mentioned that somebody had cancer. Didn't say it was her, but mentioned that someone had cancer, and now all of these rumors are flying, and it's a source of stress, right? So going into rumors, I would say that there's no real way to prevent them. Sometimes some people are just gossipy in nature. Sometimes, like in Hannah's case, she didn't necessarily mean to betray Alexa's trust like that. Sometimes things just kind of slip out. So you can't really control how they spread. But something that you can control is trusting people and who you trust and who you talk to things, like who you talk about to things. But like I said, sometimes people just blurt and they don't mean it. But anyway, going back to the show. So Alexa cannot try out for basketball because she can't get overworked and tired due to her chemo and everything. So we see this shift where she kind of encourages Katie to try out in her place. And Katie's tall and everything, but Katie definitely isn't good at basketball and she doesn't really like it. So this is something that she's not good at, doesn't really like it, and Alexa is kind of encouraging her to try out for the basketball team, and she says something along the lines of, "We're best friends. We share everything. When you're sad, I'm sad. When I'm happy, you're happy. When I play basketball, you play basketball," or something along those lines. And I wanted to talk about this because even though Katie, agrees to do it and wants to do it for her friend, like, do you think this is fair to Katie? Do you think it is fair or okay of Alexa to kind of ask Katie that or to kind of push that onto Katie? I wanted to talk about that and why or why not. So just thinking about that. I'll type the question in the chat box. To succeed, Katie, not of her. Why or why not? Question mark. Okay, so I have, oh, there you go. Fix that typo. Do you think was fair, Katie? I officially put the question in the chat box if anybody wants to type a response while I sip from my water with my compostable straw. And this is, there's no really like right or wrong answer here. I guess it can be, just your opinion, just something to discuss and to think about. I have my answer, which I'm going to tell you all about, but I want to hear what other people have to say first before I get into it. So, talking about Alexa pushing Katie to try out for the basketball team. Nisa says, no, I do not think it's fair because you cannot force someone to live your dream because you do not have the opportunity to do so yourself. However, I understand where Alexa is coming from, but still not okay. I agree. I agree with Nisa. If anybody else has an answer to that question, feel free to drop it in the chat box. But I'm going to begin to start to, excuse me, I guess I need more water. I'm feeling kind of funny. Not that kind of funny. I'm not sick, I promise. But this is virtual. So anyway, yes, I agree with Anissa. I think that obviously when you're close with someone and you have a best friend and you share everything, that's great. But in like what Anissa says, to live through someone or to have someone else kind of do the things that you've always wanted to do but you can't, and in a way it's not fair because that's not really something Katie wants to do, and she kind of feels obligated to, or she feels like she'll let Alexa down if she doesn't. And we've already seen in the show, it's only been a few episodes, but we've already seen how loyal and trusting and supportive of a friend Katie is. So perhaps it might be possible that Alexa may be taking advantage of that when it comes to the basketball team, because she was very upset that she couldn't try out. But her logic is that if her best friend tries out for the basketball team and gets on it, then, it'll be kind of like she's playing it too. But we'll talk a little bit more about that and how it doesn't really work out like that. But yes, I think this is a perfect example of, well, let me ask what could have been done differently. I was going to say this is a perfect example of an opportunity for Katie to set something called boundaries. So I have two definitions of boundaries here that I'm going to read. So when we think about boundaries, the definition I have here is a line that marks the limits of an area. So for example, if you live, for example, the border of Massachusetts and Connecticut, the kind of imaginary line of Massachusetts and Connecticut, that's a boundary. That's like a border. So if you cross that, you'll end up in one state or another. If there's a line of tape on the floor and they say, oh, like, don't cross this line, like, that's a boundary. That's a more example of a physical boundary. But in regards to ourselves as people, and how we interact with other people and interact with ourselves, we have more of, like, I guess, emotional boundaries. And that definition, what I have here is guidelines, rules, or limits that a person creates to identify reasonable and safe ways for others to behave towards them. Okay, so I'm going to read that again. Guidelines, rules, limits that a person creates to identify reasonable and safe ways for others to behave around them. So let's get into boundaries. Believe it or not, most people have some sort of boundaries. We come across this most of the time in everyday life. If you have ever heard somebody say, you're in my bubble, or something like that, you're in my personal space, you're in my bubble, could you please back up a little bit? That's a boundary. That's a boundary that the person is setting with you. That is a physical boundary of, hey, you're a little too close to me. I'm not super comfortable with this. Can you please back up a little bit? That's an example of a boundary that most people have for themselves. And that's something that varies based on person to person, different cultures. In some places, it's totally acceptable to greet someone with a kiss on the cheek. But for others, if somebody does that, it's like, hey, like, what are you doing? So that's an example of a physical boundary. There are also some other types of boundaries that I wanted to talk about. So there, I wrote down intellectual, emotional, physical, social, and spiritual boundaries. And I just want to say that no matter how old you are, whether you are 100 or you're 10 or 5 or however old you are, you of course are your own person and you have the right to have boundaries. So talking about these different types of boundaries, intellectual boundaries, right? So as a human being, as a person, you have the right to your own thoughts and your own opinions on things. Emotional boundaries. You have the right to your own feelings. You can feel your own feelings. That is an emotional boundary for you. Physical, like I was saying earlier, you have the right to your own space as a person. So going back to that, you're in my bubble. Like that's the boundary that you have the right to establish and to set. Social boundaries. You have the right to your own friends and pursuing your own social activities and hobbies. And then spiritual boundaries. You have the right to your own beliefs, your own faith, or lack thereof. So after I just went over a little bit of a lot, but let me just recap different types of boundaries: intellectual, emotional, physical, social, and spiritual. So, out of those things that I mentioned, which one of these is a boundary that Katie could have set with Alexa in regards to the whole basketball situation? Okay. So, in regards to Alexa kind of trying to force Katie to try out for basketball on her behalf, if Katie, made that clear, that could have been a boundary that Katie doesn't want Alexa to cross. But what type of boundary? Is it an intellectual boundary? Are her thoughts and opinions being kind of like infringed upon? Excuse me. Is it an emotional boundary? Is it her feelings that's kind of being compromised? Physical boundaries, her own space, is her body and her space being like encroached upon right now? Social boundaries, is it her friendships or her own social activities and hobbies that are being compromised right now? Or is it spiritual boundaries that are being breached when in regards to her spiritual beliefs and her faith and stuff like that? So, which one of those boundaries do you think Katie could have set with Alexa in regards to her basketball situation? I will wait for some comments to drop in the chat box while I sip once again from my compostable straw. Cold. Okay, let's see. We got a response from Nisa. And Nisa says, intellectual, emotional, and social, I feel like could all be boundaries being crossed. However, if I have to pick one, then social. Yes, I think Anissa is right with that one. And, once again, if you want to drop something in the chat box, even if we're not, actively discussing it, we can go back and talk about it. Don't be afraid to comment in the chat box if you would like. But yes, I would definitely say the one that sticks out to me the most is that kind of social boundary. So even though Alexa and Katie are best friends, bestest friends in the whole wide world, Katie and Alexa still have the right to have their own friends and to pursue their own social activities and hobbies. And as we talked about earlier in the live, this is not really something that Katie is good at. It's not really something that she's interested in. It's not really something that she wants to do because she enjoys it. This is something that she wants to do to make her best friend feel better. So that is an example of a boundary that is being breached, and that's not cool. So, okay, so just Denise's comment, that's okay. But moving on to talking about boundaries, how do we figure out what our boundaries are? How do we set them with other people? These are things that are challenging and something that we struggle with from childhood all the way up until late adulthood. This is something that takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. And as we get older or as we experience different things, our boundaries may change. Something that we used to think was okay might not be okay to us anymore. Something that we had a strict boundary on might be lifted over time. So, I have a few little steps in how to practice setting and respecting your boundaries. So, the first thing, and like I said, we struggle with this at any age. So, it doesn't matter how old or young you are, this is something that we can all work on as people. And it would make our interactions with other people a lot easier, a lot smoother. So, the first thing I have is to know your limits, is to understand and respect your own needs, for you to kind of talk to yourself and let yourself know, like, this is what I'm okay with, this is what I'm not. And that can be in regards to your friendships, your relationships with your family, coworkers, all types of different groups of people that you interact with in your life. Knowing those boundaries and knowing what you want or don't want when it comes to interacting with those people. So the first step is know your limits. And I'm going to type that in the chat box. Step one. I don't know why every time I type in this chat box, I always make a bajillion typos. Know your limits. Ask yourself what's okay and what's not. Again, I apologize for it's taking me so long because I keep making typos. What's okay? What's not? Okay, so, and sometimes it takes us a long time to even figure that out, right? But that's a very key, crucial step in, when we talk about our personal boundaries. So, the second step, and this can also be difficult, all of these steps can be challenging, but if you do the work, I promise that you will feel better about yourself because you will know what is okay and what is not, and what you stand for and what you don't. But the second step is to be assertive. And by assertive, we don't mean, angry and hostile and yelling and all of those things. That's not what being assertive is. You can be assertive without even raising your voice. You can be assertive without getting angry. You can be assertive even as a shy person, but it is difficult for some of us to be assertive. Some of us are just naturally more assertive than others. Some of us just naturally kind of take over the conversation in a room, But going back to being assertive in regards to boundaries, small ways to practice being more assertive if you are not very comfortable or skilled at it. Think about the tiny little things in your life or things that happen in your life where you can speak up on them, talk about them. So, for example, let's say you are, you could be anywhere, but somebody, for example, bumps into you, or somebody like steps on your foot or something. Most people, are kind of just like, oh, whatever, ow, that hurt. But sometimes you can be like, hey, you bumped into me, or that hurt. Like you just stepped on my foot, And usually people will be like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't even realize, and apologize. That's an example of a small way that you can be assertive and practice setting a little bit of a boundary. Something else, for example, maybe this probably won't happen so much if you're a kid. I mean, it could, but if you get overcharged for something and you look at the receipt and you find out that they charge you an extra fee for something, or something that happens to me and my friends a lot is sometimes we'll go to, actually I have a good story. Me and one of my close friends went to McDonald's and through the drive-through, and he asked me, "Is there anything that you want?" And I said, "I'll get a mango pineapple smoothie with no yogurt because I don't like to eat dairy." And so he was like, "Okay." So we get to the window, and the lady hands us a strawberry banana smoothie. I'm sorry, this is so funny just thinking about it. And I was kind of like, hold on, wait a second. I got a mango pineapple one. But the funny thing about this story is before I could even say anything, my other friend who is not so assertive, right, and kind of avoids conflict, he didn't want to make anybody mad or anything. So he just kind of drove away and was like, "Thank you so much." And as nice as that was, you know, I didn't ask for a strawberry banana smoothie. I wanted a mango pineapple smoothie. So that was something that was kind of like made as a decision on my behalf. If it was me who was driving the car, I would have been like, "Oh, excuse me, like, so sorry to like bother you or anything, but I ordered a different smoothie, not this one." That is just a small example of how you could be more assertive, right? And step three, oh, sorry, I forgot to put step two in the chat box. Look at me, getting ahead of myself. Step no dairy. Yes, I know. No yogurt in the smoothie. Step two, assertive. Okay. So that I put that in the chat box. My next step that I have is to practice. Practice, practice, practice. Like anything that you're doing, whether you're riding a bike or, trying to write in cursive, even with these things like establishing and setting your own boundaries and enforcing them, that takes practice and it takes time. Going back to what I said, this is something that we work on for years and years across our life, and nobody has it perfect. But by setting your own boundaries and by practicing them, you are saying that you are worth something, that you are worth being respected. These boundaries, these are things that are okay with me or not okay with me. And as a person, it increases your self worth because you're saying, "I'm not okay with this," and you're standing up for yourself. That's why boundaries are so important in our friendships, in our relationships, with our family. Something that I'm kind of trying to work on, and this is probably something that a lot of people experience, is and this happens more when we're kids, but some sort of family function, right? It could be a reunion, barbecue, birthday party, graduation party, whatever. But this happens more when we're kids. Somebody will just kind of come up to us and just like start hugging us or give us a kiss on the cheek or something like that. And as kids, we're kind of taught like, "Oh, that's Auntie so and so, like she can do that." And the reason why that can be kind of problematic is because even in those moments as kids, we might not realize it, but by kind of letting those things happen, it can kind of create a message of, those physical boundaries don't matter. The personal bubble doesn't matter. Anybody can hug you. But that's not true. You have the right to set your own boundaries. And I think that's something that people are starting to realize, but sometimes people can kind of misinterpret that as like being rude or like, "Oh, you don't want a hug from Auntie so and so," and all of that stuff. But as much as you can be met with that pushback, you have to remind yourself that this is worth, enforcing. This is worth having my own personal boundaries. So that's step three. Practice. Three. Practice, practice, practice. I promise it will pay off. And again, the kind of like the last step in this little like process is just to remind yourself of your self-worth. Going back to what I said, no matter how old you are, no matter what you've done, no matter what mistakes you may have made, you are always still worth something. And reminding yourself of that is very important. You belong here, you have a place here, you have the right to exist here, you have the right to have your own boundaries. Just always reminding yourself of that. Always, always, always. And sometimes it can get hard, but if you can't remind yourself, I will. Go back and watch this live whenever you feel like you don't belong, and I will be here to reassure you that you have a right to exist on this planet and that you are worth something. So that is step 4. 4. Remind yourself of your self worth. My face. I'm gonna start crying. Oh my god. Okay. Yes. Moving on, more in terms of the relation of the episode, I just thought that that was very important to bring up because that was an example of a boundary being kind of crossed in this show. We said, if Katie wants to try out for the basketball team, that's great. But you got to think about the reasons. It has to be for the right reason. And as we see in the show right now, she's trying to do it to make her friend feel better. And the intention is great, but the impact is she's kind of not being honest with herself and letting a boundary of hers, kind of be breached. Or maybe she might not even be aware that she has that boundary. That's why it's so important to learn about these things. Like, oh, I do have the right to have my own friends. I do have the right to think and feel my own opinions, my own thoughts. So it's very important. And speaking of boundaries, we also see in this episode, in a few episodes in the show, Alexa's mom. I wanted to talk about this because Alexa's mom is super overprotective, right? So she decides, I'm going to work from home so I can look after Alexa. In these times, we find that a lot of people are working from home and or they're doing their schoolwork from home. So I think Alexa's mom could definitely be setting some boundaries, but with herself. And I added some tips that might be helpful for anybody who is struggling with either working from home or doing schoolwork from home. So one of the first things that I think is a really good tip in terms of setting boundaries with yourself is to don't do your work in bed, right? I know it's very tempting, it's comfy to be in the bed while we're, on the computer, typing, writing, whatever. But it's important to try to have separate spaces, right? So your bed is for sleeping, your bed is for rest, your bed is where you can relax. It shouldn't be for work. So one of my tips is to don't do work in bed. Kind of on the same train of things, um, don't like eat in bed. Like bed is for rest, bed is for sleeping. Also, with eating, this is something that I kind of break often, but try not to eat where you work. Something that is very helpful is mindfulness and being more aware of what you're doing. And mindful eating is really good because, take the time to focus on what you're eating and actually like enjoy it, right? Sometimes we watch TV while eating and work and, whatever. But if you're going to sit down with some food and take the time to really enjoy it, rather than just, scarfing down a bagel while you're trying to type out 10 different assignments, so trying not to eat where you work. And so that's another tip of mine. Another tip is to take breaks. If you are constantly, you know, working, eating, sleeping, all in bed, doing all this stuff, that can get pretty overwhelming. It can tire you out, it can burn you out. And then if you're doing all your work and bringing in stress from work or school or whatever into bed, when you promise it will be okay. It says I'm losing my connection. Okay, it says I'm back. I don't know if anybody heard that, but I was just talking about taking breaks throughout the day when you're working or doing schoolwork from home. Okay, and my last tip is to try, if possible, to make sure that your workspace and your living spaces are separate. And that's not easy for everybody. It's definitely something that I struggle with, hasn't been super easy for me, but we're so used to, home is our place to be home, to be comfy. And then when we go to work or when we go to school, that's the time for us to get into our like productive mode. You know what I mean? But since we're doing all this stuff from home, the lines are kind of blurred. And it's very easy to get caught up in all of these things, like I said, like doing work in bed or eating, trying to, and then you're not present, you're not mindful, you're not really home. So, the last tip that I have is if possible, make sure that your work and living spaces are separate. But going back to the show, in our last scene of the show, just to wrap things up, so we talked about boundaries and stuff today. And this is a boundary that Katie has decided not to enforce. So she tries out for the basketball team on her best friend's behalf. And she ends up doing okay. There's a big shot at the end of the episode where she blocks the shot from going into the basket. But in the process of that happening, her wig falls off. And everybody sees that she's bald. And everyone says, "Oh my gosh, it's Katie. Katie's the one that has cancer. It's been her the whole time." And now we're like, oh goodness. So that is where we leave off on episode 3. So we have talked about a lot of good stuff today. It was great to have you all here discussing this with me. Next week, we're going to be talking about Incredibles 2. It's on Netflix and it's also on Disney Disney Plus. So if you're able to check that out for next week's live, that would be great. And thank you all for joining me and talking about all of this good stuff. And I will see you next week. Yes, Denise says, love that movie. So excited. All right. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And I'm going to be ending the live now. So Incredibles 2 next week. Don't miss it.